There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people to see if they could become something more, to see if they could work together when we needed them to fight the battles that we never could.
Oh my gosh, are we talking about the Avengers? Yes, we're finally doing something cool!
Not really.
World history would be so much cooler if we were talking about the Avengers saving New York from aliens and saving the world from Thanos and a time heist, but alas. Maybe I can use all this social distancing to finally build that DeLorean time machine I've been planning on. Whatever, back to the video.
We're talking about the closest thing the world has ever seen to the Avengers, a group of people that comes together for the greater good of society, and that's the formation of organizations like the United Nations. It's probably less like the Avengers because it doesn't really have superheroes and crime fighters. It's more like a Jedi Council, if you will. The United Nations consists of representatives in countries from all over the world that work together to keep the world safe, to keep peace, and to make sure that people's rights are being protected. Today we'll focus on the origins of the formation of the United Nations and other global peacekeeping organizations. So let's start at the beginning.
The first global peace organization was the League of Nations, which was formed in 1919 as a result of World War I.
President Woodrow Wilson of the United States played a major role in the peacekeeping after World War I. He wanted to make sure that this would never happen again, and in many ways saw himself as a mediator, much like a school teacher or a principal. Kind of ironic, since that's what Woodrow Wilson was before he was president. One of the things Woodrow Wilson did to lead to peace after World War I was write the 14 points, 14 steps that the world needed to take to ensure that a conflict like World War I would never happen again. One such step was the League of Nations, a conjoined union between all of the leading powers worldwide that would work together to keep conflict from happening again. And it was a great idea, and many of the allies after World War I were in, except for the United States. Many Americans believed that the League of Nations would undercut U.S. authority worldwide and actually limit the United States' growth as a world power. Without U.S. involvement, the League of Nations proved too weak to actually attain its goals. So really, you can blame Woodrow Wilson. Wilson! Castaway, Tom Hanks, get it? This, combined with other failures, caused the League of Nations to fall rather quickly.
In 1931, the new radically nationalist and imperialist government of Japan invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria, and the League of Nations reacted by doing absolutely nothing. When Benito Mussolini took power in Italy, the League of Nations only gave him small sanctions to limit his growth. The League of Nations also refused to intervene in the growing violence of the Spanish Civil War, allowing dictators like Mussolini and Adolf Hitler to get involved. This allowed the power of both Hitler and Mussolini to continue to grow and remained unchecked as both became threats to European stability.
It wasn't just that the League of Nations did nothing, it's that they actually enabled dictators like Mussolini and Adolf Hitler to gain the power that they did. I mean, seriously, the League of Nations' response to Hitler when he invaded the Sudetenland was, yeah, sure, go ahead and take that, just don't take anything else. Hitler said, are you serious? And they said, yeah, sure, go for it. Really unbelievable how unaware the League of Nations actually was. In fact, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of England famously said after that discussion with Hitler that there will be peace in our time. Couldn't have been more wrong. Just days later, Hitler, the Nazis, and the Soviet Union will both invade Poland, which sparks one of the biggest conflicts of all time in World War II. One can argue that the failure and inability of the League of Nations to do what it actually set out to do is exactly why atrocities such as World War II and the Holocaust ended up happening. It's because of the start of World War II that the League of Nations crumbles. It showed that what it was supposed to do in preventing another world war, it couldn't actually do. That's why after World War II, we need something new, something better, something that is deeper rooted in structure, that can actually prevent these conflicts from happening, that has participation from the United States and all of the other major powers worldwide to ensure that, once again, this massive conflict can never happen.
The result is the United Nations, and this time around, all major world powers realized that they needed to be involved in order to make this actually function.
The United Nations itself actually contains 6 different governing bodies. The first is the General Assembly. This is the main representational body that has representation from all members. It's what you would generally think of when you hear of the UN. They're the ones who make different decisions about how the world should progress moving forward. They decide on whether or not new members will be added. They decide on budgetary means, and when issues of global peace arise, this is where those things are debated. The second body is the Security Council. This is the group that decides on how the UN will progress based on the different issues that are debated in the General Assembly. Oftentimes, the Security Council grants the use of military force when a certain member of the UN violates UN principles. It has 5 members who are permanent. They are the surviving allies after World War II, the United States, France, Great Britain, Russia, and China. But it does elect 10 other members to join on a rotational basis. Disagreements from these 5 nations have often prevented the UN from acting in certain situations in which they could have provided a peaceful solution. UN is the Secretariat. This is sort of the leadership for the entire UN. Generally, the Secretary comes from a smaller nation who doesn't have the influence of a bigger nation like the United States or Great Britain or China. This is meant to check the power of the greater nations and ensure that the United Nations is able to do the work that it is designed to do. The International Court of Justice is the judicial system of the United Nations that often makes decisions based on whether or not somebody has violated UN principles. It can make recommendations to the Security Council, but it doesn't actually have the ability to punish anything. The largest body of the UN is the Economic and Social Council. This is the one that responds to different issues with the economy and the environment and social standing worldwide. Since the 21st century, this has specifically been in power to respond to environmental concerns as well as poverty. World Council, which would introduce new countries when land was given out by the UN, and it would walk by them in their government. Most notably, this includes a country like Israel. No new countries have been created since 1994, so the trusteeship has been, in effect, shut down. One of the first goals of the United Nations when it was formed in 1945 was something we've already mentioned in the past, and that was the Declaration of Human Rights. It was universal. It was meant for all people.
It was meant to ensure that human rights were protected worldwide and that atrocities like the Holocaust would be prevented moving forward. It included rights and freedoms like freedom from slavery, equality before the law, the right to a nationality, the right to own property, and things that we would assume to be basic, but now they're actually checked and kept in effect.
The reason this declaration was effective was that it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was backed by the governing body of the United Nations, which had all of these powers worldwide who would intervene if these rights were violated. The United Nations played a vital role in the wake of World War II in reorganizing the world and encouraging decolonization worldwide, causing European powers to get rid of their colonies in different places around the world. It also encouraged self-governance and the creation of new states in the wake of World War II, most notably the creation of Israel.
The now infamous partition of land in the Middle East resulted in a modern state in Israel, but also created more conflict between Muslims and Jews in the Middle East.
But the United Nations is most recognized for its work when it comes to peacekeeping.
This was first seen in the wake of World War II when the UN sent a peacekeeping mission into Korea in what resulted as the Korean War in an attempt to stop conflict between North and South Korea. In the 1960s, the UN sent a peacekeeping force to keep the peace between Egypt and Israel as conflicts continued to build over the Suez Canal during the Suez Crisis.
Ever since the Korean War and the events after World War II, throughout the Cold War, the UN was dedicated to preventing global conflict from ever happening again. And it's safe to say, for the most part, the UN has been very successful in that. We haven't had a conflict on the global scale of World War II. We've had smaller regional conflicts, but for the most part, those conflicts were either engineered by the UN or intervened in by the UN. And while the UN certainly stands for peace and preventing global conflict, it also stands for the continued protection of rights. And like we said earlier, the UN exists to make sure that those rights are actually protected. This is why the justice arm in the International Criminal Court of the United Nations is probably the lasting legacy of globalized culture and globalized institutions. The International Criminal Court relentlessly pursues individuals who violate the rights outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as well as UN standards worldwide.
While the court itself was not officially established until 2002, the UN set a precedent for justice after World War II with the Nuremberg Trials in 1945, which convicted the war criminals of World War II for the atrocities of the Holocaust.
Since then, criminals including Muammar Gaddafi and Joseph Kony have been convicted by the UN's international courts. Despite its goals of keeping peace and protecting rights and making the world an overall better place, whether it's in the environment or dealing with poverty, the UN is not always effective. It's often been criticized for very slow response times. It is just one governing body. It can't be 100% successful all the way around the world. And that's just a greater reflection of the history of our world. We're always going to have conflict and we're always going to have trouble. At least now history and globalization have allowed us to have a governing body that can intervene when necessary. And that is the true legacy of the United Nations. It has prevented numerous global conflicts from happening, and it has arguably made the world a safer place than it was before. And so the globalization debate continues. Is the world better off than it was before? That's an opinion question, and that's one that you have to figure out for yourself. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.